Hello and welcome to my studio. In this video I'm going to show you how I made this picture. By using a continuous light source such as daylight or LEDs, you can open up the creative possibilities of stretching out the exposure over several seconds. This will give time to introduce a controlled blurring of the image, and in this video I'm going to show you exactly how I did it. Okay, so this is what I've got set up so far. So I've placed a black cloth on the top of this table, and on top of that I've placed the subject, which are these tulips. So I'm going to be using a continuous light source so that I can stretch out the exposure. Normally I'd be using Studio Flash, but occasionally it's useful to use something which is on all the time. You can do this outside with daylight, sunshine on a nice day. Unfortunately the weather isn't playing ball at the moment, so I'm going to do it in here. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is actually set up a light. And I'm going to try and mimic a sunny day with maybe a little bit of haze in the clouds so that you don't get very prominent shadows. I want something a lot softer. So this is the light unit that I'll be using, and this is an LED continuous light source with a daylight colour temperature. And what I need to do with this is just put it on a stand to get it up here. There we are. So that's up in the air now. And this has a Fresnel lens in the front here, and this one is actually focusable. So I can change from a wide angle to a spot for the light source. So we'll just point that roughly at the subject, and I'll just turn this on. There we are. Now obviously one of the major advantages of using a continuous light source is you can actually see what it's doing. So as I move this around, you can see the effect on the flowers there. Okay, so somewhere around there is probably a starting point. And I'll leave it relatively wide, like that. Okay, so with that done, next thing would be the camera. So I'll be using this medium format camera with an 80mm lens on the front of it. So that's roughly the same field of view as you would get with a 50mm lens from a full frame format camera. Okay, now because this is going to be a long shutter speed to achieve the amount of movement that I want, I'm going to definitely need a tripod. So a robust tripod is going to be essential for doing this sort of thing. Okay, so with that I can just set up the shot. So on a medium format camera you can have a waist level finder, which is what this is, and it gives you a big bright view of the subject. But bear in mind that the view is reversed from left to right as it's going through a mirror. Okay, so the first thing to do is just to focus this up. So I'll just wind that to about there somewhere. And with that, the next thing to do would be to tether the camera into Capture One software so that I can follow along and see the results as I get them. There we are. So that's all tethered now, and you can see the actual settings that I have on the camera on the software here. So it's in full manual mode. At the moment I have a shutter speed set of 1/60th of a second, ISO 100, and again at the moment I've got an aperture set of f8. Now normally I would do a test to see if there's any contamination from the house lights, but that's totally irrelevant when you're using continuous light sources. So you have to turn the lights out anyway. There we are. So now I can grab an image just with these settings and just see what I get. There we are. You can see from that image that it's a little underexposed, possibly by a couple of stops. So what I'm going to do is just change the shutter speed from a 60th to, what shall we use, a 30th? 15th would be 2 stops. Try that. There we are, that's looking like a bit better exposure. This is possibly a little bright. Let's just zoom in and we'll have a check on the focus. That leaf is definitely in focus, but this flower isn't. So we need a bit more depth of field. So I'm just going to change the aperture to f16. So to make up for that, I'll have to alter the shutter speed again. And what I'm aiming for is a relatively long shutter speed anyway. So all this helps. So the difference between f8 and f16 is 2 stops. So let's just do that. So very roughly, that will be about 1/4 of a second. So we'll grab that again. Yes, so the exposure is looking the same as the previous one. That was the previous one. That is this one. But the focus is considerably better. If I zoom in now, we can see that these are all in focus and the leaves are in focus as well, which is what we want. Okay, so with that I'll temporarily just turn the house lights back on and we'll set up the rest of the shot. Now you can see from this there's all sorts of things in the background. I need to add a flag just to clean up the background a bit. So there we are. That should just make the background black, which is what I want. Now I've got quite a large distance here between this background and the subject. So hopefully I should be able to just use the barn doors on this light just to make sure that the background isn't illuminated fully. So something like that. We'll see how we go. We'll give it a try like that. So I'll just grab an image and see what we get. There we are, that seems to have achieved the result I want. So this is what we had before, and this is what I've got now. So this has gone to a nice inky black. Okay, but the actual quality of light isn't really what I want. I mentioned at the very start that I'm trying to mimic a hazy, cloudy day. So I don't want very hard shadows like this. So what I'm going to do is introduce a scrim over the top here just to take the edge off the light. Here we are. So this is a 1/4 stop silk in a frame, and I'm just going to pop this on this stand just like that. So with that in position, what I'm going to do, grab an image and just see what difference that's made. Okay, so the first thing to notice is it's taken out some of the intensity. This is what we had before. This is what I've got now. And it's also softened it, but not very much. You can see on this shadow, it's still pretty harsh. So what I actually want to do is make it a bit softer still. So the way I'm going to do that is add some diffusion material to the top of the scrim. So I'm just going to lay this on the top like so. There we are. And we'll just grab that again. And there, immediately you can see that the shadow has almost disappeared, which is much more like what I want. If I just zoom out to the full picture, we can see that that's also taken out quite a lot of light. So I'm going to add another stop. So I'll change the shutter speed down again to 1/2 a second. We'll just try that. Yes, that's starting to get there. But I'm not going to be able to maneuver the camera very much in 1/2 a second. I need to take it down considerably more. So first of all, I'm just going to make sure that I'm at the very base ISO. So on this camera, I can actually take it down to 50 ISO. So that will gain me one more stop. So now I'm on a second. But even that isn't going to be long enough. I need to be at about 5 seconds for the actual exposure. So what I'm going to do is set the shutter speed to 5 seconds. Now in order to get a meaningful exposure, I need to definitely turn the house lights out now. There we go. So with those out, what I can do, grab an image and I'll just see what I get. Okay, so at 5 seconds, these are burning out still, so it's still a bit too bright. Now, if you were outside doing this, you could add neutral density filters to your lens, which will take out some of that extra light that you no longer want. But since I'm doing this in a studio and I have full control over the intensity of this light, I can actually just turn the light down. So I'll go from 100% and we'll try maybe 60%. There we go. So with that, I can now grab another image and we'll see what we get this time. Yes, that seems to have taken it down. It's possibly taken it down a bit too much, and I think I've gone a little overboard with the softness. It looks a little too soft. So what I'm going to do is, again, just adjust the light. I have the ability to focus this, so what I'm going to do is just wind this out until it's giving me a bit more of a focused beam. And the other consequence of doing that is it will concentrate the light, which will actually increase the exposure slightly, hopefully. We'll grab an image and see what it looks like. There we are. So that's definitely increased the definition. That's what we had before. That's what we've got now. And it's also increased the exposure a little. That's what we had before. That's what we've got now. So that's about there, I think. The next thing to do is to think about this intentional camera movement. So I'm going to add some more time to the shutter speed to allow me time to actually move the camera during the exposure. I've set all this up so that the exposure is correct at about 5 seconds. So if I double this exposure from 5 to 10 seconds, then in theory anyway, I've got 5 seconds to move the camera around before I have to fix its position to grab the proper image. You'll see what I mean as I go on. So the first thing to do is just to change this from 5 to 10 seconds. And now, once again, with the house lights out, I can go for an exposure. But this time, what I'm going to do is take the camera off the top of the tripod, like so. So if I start the exposure with the camera not locked down, I can actually maneuver the camera itself during the exposure. So let's just give that a go. And the idea is that you don't actually want to move it very far. So I'll just move it a tiny bit. I'll start the exposure and it'll count down, and at 5 seconds I'll lock it off. There we go. So you can see from that it's starting to get there. We've got a nice blare in the background, but the difference between the blurry background and the actual flowers themselves isn't very pronounced. So there's quite a lot of trial and error in this. So let's just have another go and see what happens this time. So I'll unlock the camera and we'll start the exposure. So that's the sort of thing, and you can see that the difference I've got between the two images is quite pronounced. And that's what makes this quite fun, really. You never know quite what you're going to get. So in order to get something reasonable, what I'm going to do is just keep going, and I'll keep trying different movements until I get something which I like. Yeah, not bad. I'm just going to carry on and see if I can improve on that. Okay, so for actually capturing the image, that's it. So I can turn the house lights back on, and now I can just assess which image I'm going to take into Photoshop to do the bare minimum of post-production. So here we are in Photoshop, and I've loaded up 5 of the images that I collected earlier. So this one is one of the first ones that I did, and you can see the idea. It's coming together quite nicely, but I'm not too sure this is the best of the bunch. So this is another variant, same sort of thing really. Now this one I quite like. I do like the streaks that I've got in the background, and then there's this one and this one. So I think out of all those, the one that I'm actually going to go forward with is this one. So I can close down the rest of those, and this is the one that I'll be taking forward. So the first thing to do would be just to make a copy of that. So I'm just going to make a duplicate layer, but ask for a new document. And we'll just call it tulips. There we go. So now I can close down the camera original. I've always got that to go back to. So this is the one which I'll be editing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a levels adjustment. So I'm doing that on a layer, so I have control over where it actually gets applied to. So I'm just going to bring this up so I can bring the background up. These bits here. The foreground may well burn out slightly, but I'm not too bothered about that because I have that control over it. So about there somewhere, I think. So now if I go on to the layer mask, which is associated with that level, I can pick a paintbrush, nice and big, very soft, make sure that black is selected as the foreground color, and I'll just take this all back again. There we are. So you can see the effect that's had. That's the before, and that's the after. Right, so with that done, I'm just going to apply a crop. Now I think I'd actually just like to rotate that ever so slightly in the frame. I'm actually going to grow the frame around the image like that, and I'm going to ask it to do me a generative expand. So it'll automatically fill these areas in, which should be quite simple because they're mostly black. Okay, so we'll give that a go and see what happens. Yes, and I think that's worked quite well. And there we have it. So that's my take on intentional camera movement. So by increasing your exposure time, it allows you time to actually move the camera during the exposure. And the results can be very interesting. And I think that's worked rather well. Okay, well I hope you like watching how I made that image, and if you like watching these sort of things, do click on the other images as they appear, and don't forget to subscribe. Oh, and hit the like button. Thank you very much for watching.